Right, so the big question that we asked is, why do dogs need Galen myotherapy? So that's a really big question, and hopefully by the end of this we are going to give you, especially people that don't really know much about what we do or how we do it, more of an answer to that question, because we know, and I know, that Galen myotherapy is a vital part of a dog's intrinsic health. So fundamentally, what we do is we use targeted canine massage techniques. So the targeted bit is really, really important, because anyone can apply massage techniques on a dog, or anyone, but it's knowing where to. That is the important thing, is knowing where to. And also, sorry, I'm just admitting people at the same time, but knowing where to, so you apply the right technique for the right condition. And anyone really can find a painful place on a dog, and that is not what we do. We assess a dog so we can actually work with them appropriately. So Galen myotherapy has developed and evolved over 20 years, and it's only been developed from the backdrop of working with dogs, and it hasn't been adapted from human therapies. It's been used, the way we use it is absolutely for dogs. So much of what we see about canine therapy has been taken from the human world, and this is not what we've done. So everything we do is absolutely for the dog. So we are a totally dog-centric organization. It treats the whole dog too, and that's something that hopefully it will become more apparent as we go on through these slides. We use a 360-degree assessment. So we don't just put our hands on, we are assessing the dogs that we see from a distance first. So first of all, we're actually observing them. So we look at how they move. Of course we do. That is so important. We also look at how they look, how they present, their balance and their symmetry. All these things give us clues as to where and how to treat that particular dog and condition. We also look at certain behaviors too, which also link with their specific condition. So it's before we even lay our hands on a dog as a myotherapist, we go through a big assessment criteria, and that allows that targeted approach. So how we treat, we're constantly evolving because new things are coming through and learning, but very excitingly, we've been doing certain things for many, many years, and the science is actually catching up with us, which is great, because now we know that the science and we agree. But we're also looking at new science. We're always looking at tissue physiology. We're looking at the newest myofascial science, which we will be talking about quite a bit in this talk. Myofascia, or fascia, is a fantastic science that is going to really revolutionize everything about how we understand the movement within the body, ours, dogs, quite everything. So Galen over the years has brought lots of knowledge to the canine world and the canine health world, and this knowledge is sort of being diffused now, which is great. It's now sort of common practice that people know you not to throw dogs and not to jump out of cars too often, and things like that. It's become known, but that started with us. Now, what we're going to be looking at today as a part is going to be posture. And this is something that a few people are using as part of their assessment, but this is something that we have done for years. So we're real experts now on interpreting the real nuance of posture. So that gives us such an insight into a dog's perception of comfort, because dogs, as you all know, are terrible at telling us what actually does hurt. They hide it very, very easily. well, not easily, but they hide it from us. So just as a little introduction, there I am on the left. I started, I'm the founder of Galen Myotherapy, and it's in its 21st, we're in our 21st year, Cushla. And I started it from actually years before, when one of my dogs suffered a very bad muscular problem that actually could have resulted in him being put to sleep, but wasn't, luckily. And that inspired the whole creation of Galen. So that was more than 20 years ago, but Galen's been going for 20 years, which I have to say that a few times because I still can't believe it. Anyway, Cushla, over to you. Who are you?
Hi everyone. Brilliant to see you tonight. My name's Cushla Lamen. I've been with Galen for 15 years. My whole being is around dogs. My whole life is dog centric. I'm involved in the sport of canicross, which is one of the harness sports, which I've been involved with since 2002, so a very long time. And because of my involvement in the sport was how I brought me to Julia, because I realized that this was an amazing sport, but I wanted to make sure that whatever I did was ethically and from a welfare point of view was the best I could do for my dogs, which is what really led me on a very long journey to Galen. And it's really been, it's been an eye-opener and a fantastic journey for me. I'm also, that's my main job, is I treat dogs. So I do a lot of non-sporting dogs as well as sporting, and my role at Galen is also I'm head of school, so I also look after all of the students here, which is a fantastic role.
Wonderful, thank you, Cushla. Yeah, it is fantastic. Right, let's get on. Now, this picture, I believe the actual therapist that was clever enough to elicit this change is on this call, which is very exciting. But I think really, to really go in and show you very dramatically one particular case of a change in posture and therefore comfort in a dog. So a picture is definitely worth 1,000 words. And this picture is very interesting. It's very, very dramatic. Anyone can see the difference in this dog. But for me, what really resonates in this is that I have found out that this was after this change was just after one treatment, and that is phenomenal. Now, that's not terribly common. It can happen, but one treatment. But also the other thing, which is really phenomenal and really significant for the talk we're giving today, is that actually that treatment only really involved a treatment of this dog's neck and shoulders. And by treating the neck and shoulders, it made that significant change in that whole dog's appearance and perception of pain. And that demonstrates that these myofascial connections and treating the whole dog as we do is the way that does facilitate these amazing changes and amazing results that we see. So this dog was treated by one of our international students from Norway, Birte, and she is actually, you can find her online like you can all our team. So how does massage work? So those words there, the treatment physically manipulates the surrounding tissue. So that is really important. We are moving tissue. We are shifting tissue with every different technique. We are moving, but the body needs movement. Cells need movement. So that in itself is going to make a change. But as we said, it's targeted. What we're then doing is creating, because it's targeted, a really positive bio and neurochemical physiological change. In other words, we're facilitating a change within the cells so they can operate better, so they can metabolize better, so they can work in a much more healthy way. And that will then improve tissue integrity. And that is basically what we do. And I know lots of people have said, oh, wow, what you do is amazing, which is very kind of them. But actually, it's the body that is amazing. We are just facilitating that change. We are helping to change the body's internal environment to create change and balance. but that is multifaceted too. It's not just the manipulation of the tissue. It's also to do with that direct contact with the dog and that the interpretation of the tissue. That is incredibly important and why our targeted massage works so incredibly well. So going back to the targeted approach, we have, by using our hands, I mean, massage has been used for centuries now as a really, really successful therapy. But sometimes I think people lose touch with how important your hands are. There was a guy back in the 1960s, Louis Stecco, who was actually a human physio, and said, his comment was, or his statement was, a knowledgeable hand is a powerful hand. Now, sadly, massage has gone through the years and through the centuries and has been rather corrupted, the tone and the message and what it actually means. But actually to put your hands on and to be able to work through the tissue is such a phenomenal way of eliciting change within the body. And that is something that not many therapists use as much as they could. And this is something that we really do use, absolutely. So what we do by putting our hands on, we can interpret the tissue thoroughly. We can feel heat, we can feel changes, we can feel tone, we can feel tense, the tension through the skin, through the muscles. We can feel loaded muscles, underloaded, whether muscles are actually toned or not toned. And all of that, we can also then make an assessment on the type of technique that we might use over that particular area. But all that plus giving the dog choice, which is something that we'll discuss later and is a vital part of the whole treatment. So why is it so important for this targeted approach? It's so we can accurately release and unwind pain and discomfort. And the unwinding you can see very clearly in that picture between the before and after. That is unwinding a dog's discomfort. So what are the benefits? So the benefits are multiple, but basically massage can influence positively every body system in the body. So the body has various different systems that work within the whole body as a whole. Things like the circulatory system. That is one system that we can really influence. Obviously, we're working over the myofascial system or the muscles, but the circulation, we can enhance venous return, which is basically the venous return is one of the body's waste disposal systems. So it's a fantastic way of getting movement going through the body. We manipulate those myofascial connections and allow fascia to have an opportunity to return to its original shape or position, both superficial and deep. We'll be looking at both of those, but fascia basically is on two levels. It's superficial outside the body, but also it runs deep through the body too. Massage also manipulates the fluid surrounding all the cells. So all our cells are surrounded by interstitial fluid. And this fluid is still, people are working out and discovering how important it is for maintaining tissue health. So again, helping to keep the flow and movement of this tissue really, really helps the whole health of the body. So it works on a very profound level. So if we go back now to posture, because posture is such a great way of identifying an issue and discomfort or pain within a dog. So what actually does influence posture? Is it the skeleton or is it the myofascial connections or both? So let's just go to the skeleton to begin with. So let's look at how that is held together. So bones join to bone through ligaments, and then with the muscles join to the bone through tendons. So now we've got the muscles attached to the bones, and we know how the bones stick together or hold together. But muscles actually attach to different muscles through fascia. So we've got these fascial planes going through the body, and these myofascial connections actually maintain that body's integrity and the skeleton's integrity. So it's important to realize that it's actually these myofascial connections that have this major impact on the actual physical health of the skeleton as well as the muscles. So the muscles can actually affect the skeletal system, because if you've got tension and imbalance, it's going to create imbalance through the whole skeleton. So how do myofascial connections impact on posture? Myofascial connections, so again, these are muscles joining to muscles to form functional lines. So it used to be thought that a muscle used to make a movement, and that is true, but actually muscles connect to us others to create a whole movement. One muscle can create a small movement, but when you connect them all together, they can create a line or a strong, stable, strong movement with also huge amounts of stability involved in that, because they all connect together to join the body up as a whole. And this is this happens through different functional lines within the body. And what I mean by functional lines is a functional line for a body moving forwards in a straight line, going in a rotation, bending left, bending right, moving their head. All of these things are functional movements. Different gaits are functional movements. And all the different muscles and the myofascial connections connect to create this mobility and this strength through the body. So there are many different descriptions that people have used defining these connections or fascia. So fascia or myofascial connections is also known as your soft skeleton. I really like that description. It really helps understand. So you've got your sort of hard skeleton, and then you've got your soft skeleton. And that really helps me to understand where it fits within the anatomy of the dog and movement. It's also been called the organ of form, which again, that helps me understand that actually these connections help position and form a posture, whether it be good or bad. Now, the thing is, this other very great scientist, and I can't really pronounce his name, but Cushla, he actually did many different experiments on humans, but as far as I'm concerned, it transposes across this from my experience with looking and working with dogs and the human world, that actually 30% more strength is actually gained by having a balanced myofascial system. So to connect these fascial and myofascial and these functional lines together, you actually have more strength. So that adds up very much to, if you've got good posture and your body is balanced, you've got even more strength and power through that physical transmission. So the fascia actually creates this push and pull effect within the body, and we'll go over that in a minute. And they basically, with this fascia, they basically have a win-win relationship with each other. And at the moment you're going, I do not know what you mean by that. I will bring up an example in a minute. But the other fascinating thing that within fascia, there are many constituents, but one of them is collagen. And collagen keeps form. It's not very flexible. There's another part of fascia, which is the flexible part, but the collagen helps to remodel. So if the body changes, it remodels. So if the body becomes very loaded, so does the collagen becomes very loaded, therefore becomes quite immobile and not so flexible. Likewise, if you've got a nice balanced body, this collagen will be spread over the body. So you've got a really good connection throughout all of it. So working with fascia, it's a really dynamic tissue. So you can actually feel these physical changes within the body because it is so mobile. However, it will also change. So it is receptive to change. And this is where massage can really help by changing the loading of the body, and that will help the collagen distribution. So this push-pull effect is probably quite, it's not easily understood, but it's probably easier to see a more common demonstration of that or example of that. And that is the balloon. I mean, the balloon, basically the outer surface of the balloon pulls and the inner surface pushes, but together they form a balloon of great integrity. So when the forces are equal and that balloon's been pulled up or pumped up to its proper size for the type of balloon it is, you've got this smooth, wonderfully balanced construction. However, if you push one side of it, it loses integrity because you're dissipating that pressure. And that's what can happen when you have an injury. You then disrupt the integrity and the distribution of the whole. Likewise, when the balloon loses that internal pressure, the external outside actually collapses, and you do not have that wonderful integral strength of the structure as a whole. So it's quite nice to have these sort of common examples of what actual fascia and therefore these myofascial connections are doing with our body. They are actually holding them. Almost, some people say it's like the skeleton is almost floating within the body. That's quite a big thing to actually grapple with. Another really good example of what a myofascial connection is looking at two different types of tent. Now, it used to be that we used to think that the skeleton supported the whole body, just like the ridge pole tent there. The skeleton was the main support, and all the other tissue hung off that main support. But actually, we're much more like the pop-up tent. So healthy fascia actually holds the body in appropriate tension, enabling that kinetic chain or that functional line to actually function well and in a balanced way. So it's almost like we've got this spring-loaded body. And it's also called tens gritty, which is a word that comes from integrity and tension. And it's now been an accepted word to describe structures and also the human body with this myofascial complex system within us. In fact, fascia, I believe, will be soon called a whole body system. That's how incredible and amazing it is. I really hope I have done that justice and explained that to you so you begin to understand how the body works and why posture and these myofascial connections are so important for us to be working with and understanding.
So let's see, having a look at these two pictures here, we can start to see how influencing the superficial fascia can help posture. So one of the techniques that we use is skin rolling. It's a very simple technique that you can use, but the effect can be enormous. So if we look at these two pictures, if we look at the before picture on the left-hand side, we can see that the posture of the dog is kind of looking a little bit like our balloon. It looks like someone's actually poked her on the left-hand side of the rib cage and it's bulging out on the right. So those two red lines there show how much that she's actually not balanced in these ways at all. Also, looking down, you can see the back legs as well. So how far out her left leg is from her body as opposed to the right leg. And another really interesting little sign as well is her tail, which is very much over to the left-hand side. And these tiny little things about posture are what we pick up on as therapists. and gives us the opportunity to think about how we can actually influence that. So simply by applying skin rolling, targeted skin rolling on those areas, the after photo here shows how that posture has changed. So the two red lines either side of her body now show that she's evened up. She's got the same bulge on the left as the right. And also you can see that the back left leg now is tucked in nicely. Interesting as well to look at the tail. The tail is now straight out behind her. So it could be the fact that because she was imbalanced in the first photo, in the before photo, she was using the tail as an extra aid to get to stand up, perhaps, or as balance. And that's something we'll look at later as well, as the effect of that tail as well and how that can have on posture. So looking at how activity can interrupt good fascial connections. Now, it's really interesting to start to look at how the exercises that we ask dogs to do can actually have an influence on this. And a lot of it really is we're looking at repetitive exercises as well. If we look at the dog on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see that the turquoise lines there show that how her movements can be blocked by using these different postures that the dog has got. So this dog is doing some heel work and it's looking up at the owners, hoping to get a treat possibly. So the head is held in an abnormal position. And this can result in areas of overload, which is where the turquoise star is just on the dog's neck. So that is an area that's being overloaded, which means when we look at the red line, we can't get the correct function. So that's an incorrect functional line because the head is being held in an abnormal position. So natural head carriage, if you look at the picture on the right, natural head carriage and posture allows optimal fascial flow and movements. So by allowing that natural movement and that natural exercise allows the dogs to be able to develop these fascial lines, which is so vitally important, especially with young dogs. And it is vitally important with puppies that you establish these. And it's important that during puppy development, they're not asked to do repetitive exercises, but they're also given plenty of access to free running and free exercise. So they can choose the pace they do it and they can choose their natural function and gait. Also, it's quite interesting when we think about the repetitive exercises that we ask young dogs and even older dogs to do is, for example, a sit. Do we need to ask dogs to sit? We've actually got a blog on our website about that. But whether we need to continually ask our dogs to sit because it's a repetitive exercise which can start to affect those fascial chains. If you would like any more information on this, thoroughly recommend Julia's book. We've got How to Build a Puppy into a Healthy, Mature Dog. This isn't really just for puppies though either. This can be for dogs, rehome dogs as well, because it's dogs that are, need to be built up from the inside out almost. So thinking about, we use a lot of functional biomechanic exercises in our rehabilitation programs. And the idea is of those is natural movements, which will actually just develop the dogs and give them that muscular integrity, which is what we're actually after. So building the dogs up from the inside out.
Well, Cushla, thank you very much for that advert. It's very kind of you. Just to sort of clarify, biomechanics really is the science of movement. And so you may hear us be talking about that quite a bit. And it really is, it's something that we're obviously passionate about because healthy movement is just so important for all of us. And that is obviously what we're working with. So let's move on then. Let's see some more lovely dog pictures. Now, here are two pictures of golden retrievers. And I have to say that both of them were not lame in any way. They were both sound and they're about the same age. But the two pictures, the more you look at them, they could not be more different. And this is what I want to do, is just go through with you the difference between these two dogs. So the top one has fascial restrictions and the bottom one basically doesn't. And this is a lot of what we work with too, especially when we're working with sporting dogs. And I'm not suggesting that either of these are sporting dogs. We're very good at picking up on small things. So we can actually work with the smaller detail within a myofascial system, a muscular system of a dog, to actually optimize their movement as well as looking at it from a preventative side. So we don't just work with dogs that are incredibly lame. We work with dogs that for prevention, but also for sporting and movement enhancement. And this would be one of those sort of cases. So let's just have a look at what we're going to highlight here. So I'm going to pinpoint a few things, and it's the turquoise arrows that I'm going to be targeting and talking about. You can see the top line of this dog, the top line meaning the back, looks very different from the one underneath. It's got a bit of a roach or a little bit of a sort of an arch over the lower back. And that is because the hindquarters from the pelvis backwards, which is just back from that arrow, is just slightly changed. It's changed its orientation because the muscles over the hindquarters are slightly unbalanced. And so it's creating a whole change of posture, but also position of the pelvis, which has a major, major impact when you're looking at creating good functional and movement line through the body. So that top line is not as beautifully straight and free flowing as that bottom dog. And the worst part is right where that arrow is. And that's just at the lower back, and just at the lower back that almost joins and sits on the sacrum, or sits next to the sacrum onto the pelvis. And so it's a really key area, that it's a good pivot point. That's what the dogs need to be able to propel themselves forwards. You can also see the coat is different around there. It just looks a bit disturbed. And that's another thing we look at to correlate with our other assessments. So another point that we're looking at is the hindquarters, but actually what I'm looking at is the muscle definition. Now, if you look at the muscle definition at the point of that arrow and then compare it down to the dog below, the muscle definition or the tone of that dog on the top is very, very much less than the tone of the dog below. Now, a lot of that is because the hind leg is in a different position. Now, that's quite interesting because the muscle of where that arrow is on the top dog is not able to work effectively because there's a restriction. So it can't actually flex through the stifle or through the hock as well as the bottom one. So it's not activating all those muscles within the hind limb. And that's having a big impact on the whole of the movement of the dog. And part of that impact is through the neck. And the neck is always one of the major places we look at. The neck is always involved when there is a problem with any form of movement. But you can see on that dog here, compared to the one underneath, that you can barely see a neck. It is really quite compressed because the dog is having to compensate and use more muscle power through the front end, and that includes the dog's neck as well. Now, I just want to remind you that neither of these dogs, or the top dog, wasn't lame or unsound. This is just the beginning of things getting tense and changing before you actually see any sort of physical change in their gait. And another point I wanted to sort of point out to you, 2 points there, is that the forelimbs. Now, you can see that actually we're not talking about conformation, but obviously conformation is a huge part of it too. The better the conformation, the better the movement and the more free flowing. But this dog has actually looked tense and tight from its elbow through to its shoulder, exactly where that arrow is pointing, compared to the dog underneath that just looks so free and easy that it's using its whole body to propel itself forward. So there are restrictions all over this dog's body. And then finally, the tail. I mean, what we tend to do is top and tail when we are assessing. Now, this tail is really interesting because more often than not, if a pelvis has got a tilt on it or a downward tilt, the tail would equally be on a downward tilt. But this tail looks quite high as opposed to the dog below. And the dog below's tail looks so relaxed and just basically not part of the action. It's really relaxed. Whereas the tail in the dog above looks like it's actively part of the movement, which going straight, the tail shouldn't really be active at all. So he's having to create and use every part of him to help propel his body. So let's strip everything back and let's look at posture from a skeletal perspective. In other words, let's have a look at what bad posture does and the impacts of bad posture on the dog's skeleton. So we've superimposed this very generic skeleton on a dog that came to us for treatment with incredibly bad posture. So you can see that the two just don't fit. Where the body should be on this dog is completely different to where it actually is. So that is going to have a massive impact on the whole skeletal structure of that dog. So here's that same dog before and after treatment. And you can see a tremendous difference between that dog's posture. It's not perfect, the after, but it's a lot better than it was before. Now, this dog is actually suffering from a skeletal disorder, lumbosacral disease. So what you're seeing in the change of posture originates from that lumbosacral region, which is basically at the lower end of the back and over the pelvis, over the beginning part of the pelvis. That's where that condition actually originates. So the dog is trying to lift itself away from that region. So therefore, obviously, overloading significantly on their front end or their forelimbs. And you can see that very clearly. Now, the lumbosacral condition is still there in the dog after the treatment, but you can see by easing these myofascial connections, increasing and improving the dog's balance by doing that, the change in posture is significant. So now, if we place those two same dogs before and after on the skeleton, you can see how before, as we said before, that form just doesn't fit. But when we change the posture, even though the posture is not perfect, it's a hell of a lot better than it was. Look at how it fits within that skeleton. So you could say, well, what does that mean? What's the significance of that? Well, the significance of that is huge, because if you've got loading, whether it's loading on soft tissue or loading or overloading on the skeleton, you're going to create what we call pinch points. And those pinch points is where the body is overloading and it's under supreme amount of stress. And that stress will create ongoing inflammation. It just will. The body will try and heal and it can't because the posture is wrong. So it would go into another inflammatory process, and that would be cyclical. Yeah, it's cyclic. That's the word. It's cyclic. In other words, you've got this ongoing inflammation. And that's why dogs need anti-inflammatories and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories to help ease that. However, if you ease the whole stress and loading, that inflammatory process or that cycle will slow down and in some cases actually stop, because we need inflammation to heal tissue. But if the tissue is being constantly damaged through overloading, that inflammation is just going to continue. And then there are going to be secondary things on top of that and an effect on the skeletal system. So you can see from this slide where those pinch points would be. And you can see from the posture, in relation to the skeleton where they would be. So the first one would be in the neck. The neck is going to be really suffering for many, many reasons, but to actually carry that load because the body can't propel itself forward, is having to pull itself forward. So the neck is going to be a huge place and always is. So the neck, firstly, over the shoulders. So that down from the neck, if you follow the top line, over the shoulders, that's another place, because again, the load is going forward, but always, you can see how the shoulders are dipped because that load is going forward. And the dog is really struggling under that load. So that dog's going to have these horrible pain between the shoulder blades. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. Now, the next one will be actually pretty much at the site of the disease, but also because the dog is trying to ease itself off that site, it's actually straightening his hind limbs. But by doing that, he's actually making the problem worse. So by easing, or trying to ease or weight shift off that area, he's actually making it worse. So this is a horrible condition for this poor dog. The other area that we've highlighted are the knees or the stifles. Now, this dog's having to really lift himself up. So hold his knees in a constant extension, which is not the anatomical true. So he's going to have a huge amount of load and pressure within that stifle joint too. So his whole skeleton has had to shift and bear a lot of load because his posture's wrong. Now, we know that's because it's lumbosacral disease, but actually a lot can be helped through easing the myofascial network, which is what we do at Galen Myotherapy. So let's just take this forwards onto another dog. And I think the point we're trying to make here is that this is a lovely little dog, 13 years old, came to see us, and you can see her posture is awful. She's terribly roached through the back. Her feet are very close together. We quite often call that goat on a rock, which I think gives a very clear idea as to her posture. So by easing her out and basically lengthening her, or allowing her body to lengthen, by doing that, you give everything a bit more room. And I talked about this earlier about cells needing room to be able to metabolize and be healthy. We're giving her whole body a bit more room. And you can see from her face how much more comfortable she is. And that's a 13-year-old dog now. I don't call that old, but that's mature. But what we're trying to say is it doesn't matter what age. By working over these myofascial connections, the way that Galen Myotherapy does, in a very targeted way, can help all conditions that affect posture, whatever the age. Looking from a postural perspective, we also look at muscle symmetry, because muscles have got to be balanced. The whole dog really needs to be balanced. And by having balance, it doesn't just mean having good muscle tone. It means having appropriate muscle tone. And often we as therapists see pictures that are being paraded as, look at this dog, this dog's got amazing muscle tone. But actually what it really is overloaded, because the dog is not balanced. Now, the dog on the left here is just an ordinary pet dog, but she is reasonably well balanced. And just looking at her muscle tone, we're not looking at anything else for the time being, you can actually see that the muscle on the hindquarters almost matches the muscle on the forequarters. And the neck looks quite a soft, relaxed neck, which actually gives good movement for the whole body. So you can see that she balances up. Whereas if you look at the dog on the right, you can see that there are areas of real density, like over the neck and also over the hindquarters, but in different places to where it is on the dog on the left. So she's got a lot of very firm muscle, but it is not balanced and it's not good tone, because what the dog has to do is, when they haven't got good stability through an integral system of holding everything, holding all their joints together, they actually go into what we call muscle domination. So some of these bigger muscles take on a role of having to stabilize the dog. And that's what's happening with the dog on the right. But it's a very inefficient way of moving and holding yourself. And you can see that she just doesn't look comfortable. But not only that, she looks really overweight, and she's not massively overweight. But the reason is because her abdominals are so loose, because she can't actually contract and hold through her abdominals because her back hurts. So she's sort of got this dipped back as well. So we look at muscle symmetry and how the muscles all balance out together to form good movement. Now, we're not going to have a muscle lesson, but basically, if you look at where the lines are, they equate to the same muscles. And these are just some of them that we've plucked together and to form a bit of a picture. But I think the two that I really want to just draw upon are the two that really, really should balance. And those are the ones in orange, which are the gluteals, and the yellow ones, the hamstrings. Those both work together to actually push the dog forward, to actually propel them forwards. And they need to be balanced to work together. And you can see on the dog on the right that the gluteals look really large and the hamstrings small. So she has not got that balance within just those two muscles alone to actually push her forwards. The next thing that we look at is the actual head and tail carriage. Now, Cushla's mentioned that a bit in the previous assessment, and you can just see how very different these two are, especially the head carriage. And we try and assess natural head carriage, not asking a dog to lift with a treat or even a voice, just to see what they would naturally look like and the height of the neck, what it would be naturally. I think I said natural about 3 times there.
So the other thing we look at is leg placement. And again, we do this where the dogs are just in a, either just wandering around and suddenly then stop. Again, we don't place them in any position for this at all. And it's fascinating what these can tell you. So we've already looked at this same dog before, and we talked about the overload that was going through his front right leg. And this picture clearly illustrates how much loading is going through that right leg. After treatment, we can see that there's a lot less load going through that right carpal joint. It's not as low down. It's actually looking more upright. And again, it's starting to look like there might be one leg at each corner. The other difference is actually looking at the placement of these legs. So by looking at the picture on the left-hand side with the red arrows, we can see that that front right is taking most of the weight and the left leg is further back. And looking at the right side, the difference with these, the legs are now evened up. They're further under the body, they're evenly taking the weight on the way through. So there's a real change in the front legs. Similarly with the back legs, we've got the fact that the left, on the picture on the left with the red arrow, that right leg again is underneath the body and it's trying to take a lot of the weight. Whereas actually the picture on the right again shows that with the green arrow, much more even stance throughout each of those. So we're back to having almost a leg at each corner, which is exactly what we want to see.
And this little dog here, this is a very interesting postural leg placement. You can see that actually practically all 4 of his limbs are underneath him, which to me indicates that this dog has had a sort of like a double whammy injury. He probably has hurt his back end as well as his front end, because he can't load on the front because the front legs are then coming back under the body to try and take all the weight into the middle of his body. So he's sort of trying to balance between the 2 ends, which is a very, very difficult situation. And I've seen many, many of these dogs. Now, what I've highlighted here is the psoas muscle, and we mentioned that earlier. And it's an important muscle because it's a movement, it's a postural muscle, it's a muscle of posture, but also it's a very important hip flexor. So it actually flexes the hip and draws the leg in a healthy dog. but also it should allow the limb to extend in a healthy dog. But what often happens with this muscle is that it actually takes on a role of holding a posture, an incorrect posture. And then when a dog goes for treatment, very often a therapist might go, oh, they've got a psoas issue, they've got a psoas strain. Whereas actually, most of the psoas problems I've seen are in dogs that it's an effect rather than the cause. And in this, you can see that this dog is relying on that muscle to hold its body together, to try and shift the weight off its back end, but also pull it back from the front end. And you can see that very clearly through the very tight abdominals, which you would think, oh, good core, but no, that is overworking to support the psoas muscle. So these things are, it's quite interesting how they can be interpreted differently, but by looking at posture, you can get a very much more accurate assessment of what is cause and what is effect. So therefore your treatment is much more accurate. So another postural assessment is this dog could look quite sort of okay, but he looks very, very relaxed through his top line, because basically where that arrow is pointing is where he's got that's where the pain's coming from. So he can only offload that by dipping his back. And by dipping his back, his hind legs have to go further back and his neck has to come forwards to try and balance him out, to actually try and create some sort of equilibrium within his body. So if we look at now the feet, because any posture, any change, any discomfort, any weight shift, load shift, compensation is going to go through the body, through the legs and straight into the feet. And that is where you will see where the actual load shift is happening in a very sort of small form. Now, on this dog, if you look at these front feet, you can see that his left leg, which is what you're looking at, is the right leg. So his left leg has turned outwards. And that's always an indication that this leg is taking a lot of load. And actually, you might even be able to see a couple of little lick marks on its foot too. We'll come on to that with behavior, but you can see a slight spread of the paws, but these feet are not evenly placed. They're not really one at each corner. But when it really gets interesting is when you look at the hind feet. Now, if you look there at that red arrow, it's pointing to the toes that are just slightly splayed. What a foot does is many different things when it's trying to dissipate weight. But one thing it does is actually spread their toes. And you will see a lot of dogs with just, their toes should be tight together in a healthy dog. But you can see that this one is just slightly splayed, but nothing like how these are splayed. Now you can actually see on the paws on the left of the screen, the orientation and angle of load that's coming down and actually driving those toes sort of inwards and that body inwards, which is a very unusual adaptive posture. And the foot on, or the feet on the right, sadly it comes from a German Shepherd, and we do see a lot of this, but the feet become actually quite flat. And they're flat because they're under so much load for so long that actually the tendons begin to become quite lax. And you can see that the nails also become long because the dog is loading on the back pad, allowing growth, extra growth through those nails. And here's some more paws for the collection. This one on the left is actually a working dog, and his feet, his leg placement, but his toes and nails are all over the place. You can see some very interesting splaying on his right foot, but also on his left, how these toes are being actually driven together, and that the medial toe, the one on the inside, is really wide apart. And his back feet very much on his back pad, but also you can see how short his nails are. So he's dragging his feet and he's not lifting his feet properly. And on the right here, we've got more hind legs or more hind feet. And again, these two, if the load is wrong, can equally flatten, as we've seen in the previous slide.
So looking at all of these postures and the way all of these dogs are presenting, what we want to have is a measurable outcome from the treatments that we're going to have. But also we need to be able to assess the dogs before we start. So a document that's been developed by Galen for over 20 years of pain-related behaviour allows us a greater insight into the dog's comfort. So this is our comfort scale, our Galen comfort scale. And this allows us to assess a dog through 4 key areas. We're looking at posture, behaviour, eating and digestion, and then other behaviours as well. So other indicators, sorry. So we're looking at all of those 4 key areas, and then we can assess the dog's comfort from those, which by then completing that after treatment allows us to measure their improvements. Dogs, as we've said, often hide pain really well, and they offer many subtle different indicators of physical pain or discomfort. So we need to interpret each of these including the correlation between these in the context of how we then actually treat them. So these pictures here show 3 different things that dogs often do, and they're ones that are actually included on our comfort scale, which is itching, chewing, and licking, which can be neurological. Often dogs that come to us, vets might have thought they had an allergy or something similar. But often, and they've tried different treatments for that, but often once we've looked at them and assessed the dogs and given them that 360-degree look, we can actually decide that it's actually muscular or fascial issues which have led them to do this. So dogs that suddenly start biting at different parts of their feet, biting at parts of their body. Some dogs, as you can see, actually do put their whole paw in their mouth because that neurological discomfort can actually be so unbearable. And that's one of the things that we actually do assess. And the comfort scale is really helpful for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is so common, isn't it? The neurological side of it, I mean, everything's neurological within the body, but it can be caused because muscles become very tight and can actually block neural pathways. It's very common, isn't it, Cushla?
It is. So the real thing is looking at treatment. And as you know that our standalone protocol for our Galen Myotherapists, we teach them to treat using positive PACT, which is giving the dogs choice throughout their treatment, which can sound a little bit strange, but it's really important that we follow the dog's body language and we really check how the dog is reacting to how we're actually treating them and the areas that we're treating them. It's really important that we only treat relaxed muscles so that the dogs are really getting the most benefit from that hands-on that we're doing. We also believe at Galen that dogs are sentient beings and that they must be given autonomy over their discomfort. And a lot of people wonder how we are actually going to treat uncomfortable areas in a dog. But actually, by allowing the dogs to give us feedback on the areas that we're working on that may be painful, that may be uncomfortable, that they may not like us touching, by actually watching the dog's reaction to all of those, allows us then to gradually work towards areas which are more and more uncomfortable as we go. So we want to be able to allow the dogs to express their behavior all the way through.
This is a group of pictures which shows, I think, very clearly one particular aspect of positive PACT. And it's about how important it is to have the guardian in the room during the treatment and how important it is to allow the dog to connect with the guardian, but the guardian must, and it looks a bit harsh with her turned away, but she's going to have to be there as a physical presence and a supportive presence, but she has got to disconnect from her dog because the dog must connect with the treatment and the therapist. And this is such a common thing that we see. The dog goes, I don't really know what's going on, but then there's a very inviting therapist saying, come and see me, come and connect with me. And the dog will walk over. We tend to take a breath and allow the dog to just settle into that situation. There'll be a bit of a connection, bit of a hello, and then, right, okay, all right, now I know what you're doing. I will definitely be happy to be treated, because a relationship has been formed, built on trust. Now, if that dog needs to move, they can go away at any time. So it's about that amazing relationship being developed, but it's important that the three are in the room. And that is why we've got the 3 pillars in our Positive Pact logo for the guardian, the dog, and the therapist. So Galen Myotherapy works brilliantly as a standalone treatment. It really does, as you can see with some of those changes that we've shown you in these slides. But it also works really well with a multimodal approach, meaning other therapies. So a lot of us work with different professionals within different realms, you know, like hydrotherapy, acupuncture, and there's a picture of Louisa there using her, I can't remember what that's called now, her laser. Sorry?
Potato.
Thank you. Do you know, I knew that word was coming up and I was going, I'm going to forget. And it works really, really well. And we can have some great cross communication, anything and everything to maximize the health and help the dogs that we are treating. So it is important to understand that we do work with other therapists and other therapies. So in summary, why do dogs need Galen Myotherapy? There are many reasons, but some of the main ones I'm just going to mention now. So one of them is the fact that massage, targeted massage that is appropriate for the dog, positively influences every body system. That is every body system. So the systems within the body, either directly or indirectly. And that's huge. That's why when we have a really good massage, we feel so much better throughout our whole body. It just gets things moving. And I'm going to say it again, cells need to move to be healthy. So going back on from there, the reason that it is targeted, because we use a lot of assessment, so it can be really targeted in our treatment and with our massage, which then helps treat the dog from a perspective of cause and effect. And that is really important, because that creates an effective treatment, but also it unwinds the dog. And that's another thing that it does. It actually unwinds by treating appropriately. We don't treat over the painful places. We ease off the painful places by treating the compensation often. That is what often actually releases those more painful causes within the dog. So as I said, it accurately releases and unwinds pain and discomfort, because we're working on the dog from an appropriate way. It's almost like when they are gathering all this muscle and myofascial dysfunction, the dog becomes small, like you've seen in those postures. So it's like a spring being pulled together, but without being able to spring. So we allow the dog to unwind and release, and then they can have their spring back. Positively influences the myofascial system, which is basically the key to what we are doing. Improves posture. So think back to that skeleton and how a bad posture does not fit well into a skeleton. So we're addressing compensatory and overloading issues. And those are huge, and they are very common. And that is what we are so expert at doing. And basically, all of that means that we're easing and managing chronic muscle pain, because all we want to do is help dogs live their best lives, whatever their age. And very much part of our whole rationale too is to support their guardian, to enable their guardian to continue with the treatment and help their dogs too. I hope that that has been helpful and given you a bit more of an idea of what Galen Myotherapy is, and also importantly, what we represent and how we work with dogs. Totally dog-centric, totally. So if you want to know any more, the exciting news is that we're actually going to be running another webinar. This one's actually going to be a paid one, but it's about equilibrium and stability of the canine. And it's a particular passion of ours at Galen because we recognize that so many of the dogs we see, their issues originate from a lack of good stability that possibly could have started when they were puppies and they didn't have the appropriate development exercises and activities. It could be from an injury, but so often it's because they haven't been built properly in the first place. So that is why we're offering as a special limited time, a free puppy book to go along with the webinar. So if you sign on to the webinar, you will get a free puppy book. But this finishes on the 20th of March. So hurry up, quick, sign up. So the equilibrium and stability webinar will be all about looking at creating and enhancing good stability within your canine. If you're interested, you can see the link on the bottom. It's galenmyotherapy.com /webinar. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much indeed, and really look forward to seeing you all at some stage in the future. Thank you for watching.